Hello there everybody, welcome back to part 6 in the Tigaria construction series. This is Tigitar here. We're gonna continue off where we left last time. As you can see kind of where we are, we're just above the painting museum displays that we did in the last video. And we get going here on the block display. So the block display, one of the larger sections of displays that I had in mind. I knew it was going to be fairly large just based on the sheer number of blocks to display. So I figured I should get on that earlier on rather than later. Make sure I have lots of room to build in and start figuring out how to best do that. So basically, the whole beginning process was just a lot of finagling the space available and figuring out sort of different shapes to separate the section into. And within those shapes, I'd allow myself space to then organize the blocks in a more thematic way. So I honestly don't remember my exact reasoning for why I started the shapes that I did, but as you can see here, I'm starting with some sort of semicircle structure. I end up mirroring this on top and bottom right here, so I kind of create an eye shape and use that to then display certain types of blocks later. But I don't remember exactly how or why I decided upon this particular shape to start with. I was just, like I kind of mentioned, I was just trying to come up with space that would allow me to organize the blocks in a more thematic way. So my first attempt was just this interesting eye shape, which would allow me some space. But then before I got too far along, I wanted to start prototyping the actual display holder, or the singular unit of display for each block type, or wall type actually, because I wanted to come up with some shape that presented the different textures and colors in different hammered and oriented blocks. So this is what I ended up settling on here, this little I don't know how to describe it that well. It's an hourglass shaped clump of blocks, but the top side is hammered towards the outside, so they look like little ears, and then the bottom top edges are hammered to the inside, sloped in. I found that this presented most all of the unique sprites that the blocks will have based on different orientation, connection, and blending and hammering. So we have like the one block at the very bottom, the second one up in the middle is kind of the fully interior block. So for blocks like the sun plate blocks, that block will be completely basically an interior solid block. So it'll have just the blue sprite, solid blue colors, and stuff like, let me think, the cogs that you buy from the steampunker. Those, when placed entirely interiorly, that's definitely a word, will have little animated features. So I wanted to, I figured that this design would allow for the best, but still pretty compact, showcase of the different block types. Then I start messing around with the same thing with the walls and fences. I needed to kind of include walls, a patch that included perimeter examples, but also interior examples. So I came up with this little, basically a 3 block stacked on 3 block, and then 2 blocks above that in the center to display the walls. And that kind of allowed you to see what a small square area looked like, but also the singular wall as it poked up. The main thing that, the main type of wall that is affected by that would be fences, because many fences have a different top texture when they are adjacent to other fences in a flat line versus standing alone by themselves or sticking up above the rest of the fence line. So then I built from there and figured out how to basically allow for smooth and fully lit lighting. So I included diamond gemspark bases beneath the little platform, which I used what are they called? Brass platforms, brass shelves from the dungeon, which nowadays you can actually craft these, which is handy. But I went with the brass shelves and then the diamond gemspark to provide smooth white lighting so that you see the true colors of the blocks themselves. And then in the end, as we will see when we eventually get there, I wired them all up so that you can turn the lights off at night and see which types of blocks glow and what their glow colors are and stuff like that. But this is what I found worked well for a smooth baseline that also provided a little bit of character, but functionally its main purpose was to most clearly display the blocks themselves. So once I had the basic layout figured out, I kind of now had a rough idea of, you know, how much space certain numbers of blocks would take up. So I mirrored this first eye shape, and on the left built a second one to match, and then basically just had to start coming up with how to keep expanding this platform framework to find more space to include enough area for the rest of the blocks. I guess it's at this point as well I realized I wanted some unique structure in the center to add color and character to the build, so that it wasn't just strictly a series of white bland platforms without much personality to them. So I came up with the idea of building a large artificial tree in the center. And so I roughly sort of laid out what area I wanted for that. And then I do go ahead and continue by building up platform and pillar structure around it, and in hopes to come up with the adequate volume of space or area of space to get all the blocks displayed. So on the far outsides, I came up with sort of robust pillars that I eventually fill in with bricks and then actuate so that there's no collision there. But that's using actuated bricks allows me to do a little bit more as far as design features, textures, and stuff. And then in the remaining nooks and crannies and little spaces in between, I start figuring out how many display platforms will fit where, and then once I kind of have that laid out, I can start going through my whole list. I think I counted up my how many total blocks there were, how many walls there were, and everything like that. And so I had an overall idea of how many total basically displays individually I needed, and I had roughly them organized into sections, so I could kind of go off of that and figure out how to best organize stuff. Let me look here. just before this. Let's see, partway through I have notes that I had 257 different blocks, 258 different walls, and then 54 platforms and 8 planter boxes to display. I think that may have changed slightly. Where is my final count here? I have it listed on the little, oh, here it is. It looks like my finalization, the final numbers I had were like 250 blocks, 258 walls, 54 platforms, and then 8 planter boxes, or planters. I think that's what it ended up being when it was finished. And I have that indicated on the little orientation sign as you're walking up to the block display if you're exploring the world here. But as you can see, I've spent a little while just laying out a bunch more display possibilities, really expanding out towards the outside, and basically my my only logic at this point was to fill in an area that was a somewhat structurally sound shape that looked interesting and cool to look at, and also something that you could see fully by just exploring on the platform framework itself, and you wouldn't be required to be able to fly to actually see all the display areas. So I really just start putting down as many platforms as I can and count up how many there are and how many more I'll need. And the ones that I just placed down here on the outside below, these ended up being extra overkill, so I didn't need those by the end of it. And then as you can see, I thin up quite a lot of them. I think I might have done my count at this point and realized that between this section of the eye shape and then the outer top and right portions, I had basically about half of the space that I needed, and I knew I was going to be mirroring that over on the left side, so I knew I was pretty good there on actual block / wall space. So that I start get all my platforms measured out and laid on the left side here. Managed to get everything off by a block, so I have to shift stuff over. The usual, basically. And then this does allow me, though, to keep everything more contained within the display, rather than I had enough space this way where I didn't have to start sprawling out, filling up little gaps on the outside, which looks visually a lot cleaner and more cohesive, which is nice. It also, I find still currently that this arrangement of display platforms does allow for I guess adequate space per block and wall type. I feel like they aren't crowding each other. They're nicely arrayed in space, so that they don't seem to crowd each other out. It's nice to see each block with enough, space to isolate it. So it seemed to be the right middle ground, where there's enough space not to crowd things, but not so spread out that it felt empty or what am I trying to say? They weren't too spread out. There's a word I'm trying to describe that with, but it's not coming to me. So then this would basically account for all the blocks and the walls. But as mentioned, I still had to figure out what to do with the platforms and planter boxes. So I had this space just below where I'm sitting right here in this part, and I had initially built block displays there to make sure I had enough room, but I ended up culling those when I found out that I did have plenty of space already. So that space actually ended up working out pretty good for the platform display. So there obviously aren't nearly as many platform varieties as there are blocks, although there are still a healthy number. I was able to fit those all in pretty easily in there. These individual platforms, along with the little display, individual displays for the item, or not items, but the tools and the weapons, which is coming after this section, each individual display took quite a bit of tedious effort just to go through and monotonously place the blocks, make sure they're painted, hammer them, and then actuate them, and then place walls. And as you can imagine, throughout the whole process and far beyond, I kept finding blocks that I had forgotten to hammer, or mainly that, but sometimes walls were missing, or paint was missing or off, or something like that. But it was quite a tedious task to get all of the platforms fully prepared, actually. Went ahead and added in some mahogany fences, painted white, of course, as sort of the binder between the platform and the gemspark lighting below, so that it had just a little bit more structure to visually support the block that's being displayed. After the mahogany, just the last final touch of the iron fence, which went in the bottom middle, and then that kind of gave it that little touch of it almost looks like a little chalice or goblet or something, or the cup of one, as it then holds the displayed subjects. So that was basically what I had for the display platforms themselves. Then I went ahead to start fleshing out the platform structure and the support pillars and all of that. So I doubled up on the diagonal platforms, which helped, beef up the structure quite a lot. The main diagonals that go up above the tree, same thing. It was a little bit tricky doing the curved stairs out on making them double thick, but I, with the help of certain fences, I believe, probably end up using rich mahogany fences for a lot of it, or iron fences for a lot of it too. That kind of fills in the gap between the platforms and makes it look more full structurally. But then certain walls, of course, poke out around the outside of the block, so I use a lot of echo walls or echo coated regular walls, whatever, to sort of contain the walls to just precisely fitting behind and between the platforms that I'm trying to fill in. Start adding in the little brick structure to the very center here, and I went ahead and just copied over one of the large emerald gemspark gems from the center of, or one of the four that surround the center core there around spawn. So got one of those installed in the middle, and actually I may have three total because I have three different main sort of energy generating support floating pieces like that. Then I start attacking the tree itself, and so this is one of my more recent practices at artificial trees and making them look not artificial and trying to give them natural looking curves and shapes and depth. Is the hardest thing to do is get the depth in sort of depicted. So I quickly, well, not quickly, I initially sketched out the main limb structure and shape and layout, and had sort of an idea of which limbs I wanted to overlap in front of or behind others. Then got the smaller limbs branched out, and then basically my idea was to do a combination of actuated and non-actuated leaves in order to provide depth. And then I guess I took a little bit of a break and I went through and added in the item frame holder for all of the block displays. So in addition to the blocks themselves, I wanted to include a little echo painted item frame that holds the item of the block itself. So that way you can kind of see not only the block in placed form, but also in item form, which is another important part of it, I guess. So I went ahead and added in a bunch of the little echo wall squares so that I could then put item frames invisibly attached next to the display sections. I did go ahead and mirror them so that all the item frames would be on the inside of the item themselves. And then I do get the item frames out, plop those all in there. And like I said, they are echo painted, so you don't actually see the item frames. You just see the little item itself floating next to the block or wall, whatever it is, or platform actually as well. Then I started back to the tree project. Started trying to figure out what leaf color I wanted to try and do. And so I decided just somewhat randomly that I would do yellow and purple / pink leaves. I think maybe I did violet for the leaf color, violet and yellow, and I tried to come up with a few other blocks that would add texture and break up the leaves and make them a little bit more, add a little bit of character. And so I think one of the things I ended up with was the crispy honey. Did I end up keeping that? I don't remember for sure now. I know that the both living leaves and living mahogany leaves I mix in together. And then I have just a couple of others. Maybe crispy honey if I remember right. And maybe like sandstone or something. It's hard to say. But anyway, I wanted a little bit more rough texture for the leaves themselves. And then I went ahead and I again started retexturing and filling in the wood itself and the trunks and the branches. And so I think basically the same thing that I did with the large vine structures on the center of Tigaria, I inset or laid behind the main trunks emerald gemspark walls to give it a green glowing energy, especially at night. And then I added on what is it, brown painted rich mahogany, living mahogany for a little more texture, and maybe just a little bit of the brown painted smooth marble as well. I can't remember if it looks like I did include that here. The marble, though, I definitely want to be pretty light with, because it does stand out just a little bit in its smoothness and lightness in color. But with not too much of it, it does help add that level of naturalness, I feel like. And then I started playing again with what leaf combination I wanted to do. And the main takeaway that I ended up with from working on this tree was it's hard to overdo the leaves. Like just really throw in a bunch of leaves, and that will kind of allow you to best depict depth. Because if you look at a real tree just out in the park or outside your house, whatever, in the forest, it's probably going to be pretty hard to actually see light through the tree. Like, you'll see very few, very small gaps of light that sort of sneak through. And I think that's kind of the main thing that I have begun to try to better represent, just the volume of leaves that come from like a 3D voluminous tree. And in 2D, in Terraria, it's hard to depict that very well. I find it's much closer to completely filling in the tree entirely with leaves than it is to do what I am doing here, which adds what at the time felt like a reasonable amount of gaps and holes through between the leaves. I do go through it. I end up, filling in more than I had before. And what my main struggle, though, with doing stuff like overfilling then is, how do you brighten up the interior sections of the leaves where now you've completely filled it in, because it gives it a more full look. The problem is the light can't penetrate that well, so you end up with dark sections. So that's where I came up with hammering interior blocks here and there, which ended up working out quite well. And if you hammer the block and then include walls like living leaves just surrounding that block in the background, the gap that you hammer out will almost be invisible visually. It'll be covered by the leaf walls around it, but it will still let light through because the block is hammered and there's no wall directly behind it. So that was kind of the thing I mainly started using to finish up the tree leaves, and that kind of allowed me to keep a pretty full voluminous feel, but still allowed the light to smoothly illuminate it and show most all of the tree. So that's the main methods that I ended up taking away from sort of this project. I do remember now, after watching my inventory, I used reef blocks here and there to provide a little different color than the rest of the leaves. So that was another sort of level of texture and color that I threw in here and there. You'll notice the distribution of yellow versus pink leaves. My initial idea was to have the left hand splitting trunk produce the pink leaves, and then the right hand trunk do the yellow leaves. But as the two trunks grow and intertwine, of course some of the yellow leaves will end up next to and in front of and behind the pink leaves, and vice versa. So that was kind of my initial logic behind distributing the leaf colors, and it actually worked out pretty good. it made for a unique distribution of leaf color. It looks interesting. I wouldn't say it looks natural, mainly just because of the color choice. But I think the effect that I was going for ended up being mostly successful. But overall, tree production is a pretty intensive process. There's a lot of steps that go into it, a lot of hammering. I haven't even begun to actuate stuff yet, so there's still a lot to do here. And then a lot of the, I think I still add a lot of walls behind here, behind these leaves. I'm also trying to think, you can see how at nighttime it all goes pretty dark, except the trunks themselves are overwhelmingly glowy. And I don't remember, I may add some lights hanging throughout the tree to help kind of balance out that the green at night, where it's not just a bright, like, radioactive green skeleton of a tree. Anyway, we're finally moving on to the actuation process. So I start basically just trying to figure out what parts I can and should actuate to add that level of depth to the thing. It'll also, of course, make it easier to navigate around and through when exploring and working. So there was some incentive to actuate a good amount of the leaves, but I still obviously needed to keep some in the foreground unactuated so that there would be depth to contrast against. And I ended up initially coming up with this amount of actuation, and then I just fairly quickly go through to blend the trunks behind other trunks that are not actuated, and just doing that really adds another level of depth and fullness to the tree. So that helped a lot right there. And again, after all was said and done, I felt pretty happy with it. Looking back on it, I still feel like I could have added more fullness to the leaves. Like, I don't know if it'd be possible to overdo how many leaves your tree has. That's kind of what I learned, I guess. Nonetheless, I was pretty happy with it, so then I got back to polishing up the rest of the platforms and the structure, and copying the theme that I already had started in the center. I was able to do that on the bottom side of the main columns and beams and stuff, whatever. Oh, that's right. So the center I make kind of unique with grass, a little bit of grass and dirt, but then the outsides I instead use my smooth basalt custom rock with the emerald crystal inside. Copy that over on the far left side. With every time, like, copying or mirroring a certain section, I try to find a different order that's more efficient. So maybe I'll place all the blocks but hammer them before putting the walls in, or maybe I'd find that putting the walls first is better in certain circumstances, so I'd do that and then hammer them. It's kind of a fun process of refinement, even in just what otherwise could be pretty boring copying process. Then I start playing around with the pillar design. obviously I want it all actuated so that it allows for easy exploration. Start playing with a little detailed window design that then allows me to hang lighting within it. So came up with something for that, and then kind of copied it over to some degree, although the upper pillars are not as thick, so I just slimmed the pattern down a little bit there. Just like that, pretty much. Then I can just copy that over on the other side. Now, I don't remember how early on I realized this, but as we will see before too long, I completely mirror this structure on the right-hand side of Tigaria to display the weapons and tools. And I don't know if I realized I was going to be able to do that by this point, or perhaps as I finished this section, I started thinking about what to do next and then realized that I could just copy it for the weapons and tools. Oh, okay. Actually, I do have I have it described here in my notes. After some blank staring at the current shape of the base, this was right after I finished the block display, I think I've got an idea in my head about how to lay out the next major zones. I'm planning to mirror the block display structure on the right-hand side and display the tools and weapons there. Then in the top center, I'm hoping to do the boss relic displays as the main centerpiece. Maybe I can put my signature above that. Then running in a line across the top above the block and weapons displays will be armor and vanity respectively. So that's kind of, as I wrapped up this display of blocks, I kind of was then able to take a good look at the big picture and start coming up with how to arrange the major part of the center of Tigaria, I guess. And then I did have to take a pretty large break after the block display to list out, organize, and then collect all of the weapons and tools that I needed to display. So then we are onto the platforms. I just basically took the stone brick platforms and came up with a small design that, similarly to the block display, I wanted the different textures in different orientations of the platforms to all be visualized. So I wanted stairs, I wanted hammered, and then I wanted basically flat sections. And the best example off the top of my head of a platform type that has unique textures in all of those orientations would be the meteor. No, now I can't remember. Is it meteorite platform or meteorite brick platform? I can't remember now. Either way, you know the one I'm talking about. If you place just a single platform, it is just kind of an off blue, sort of uncharacteristic platform. But if you put two horizontally next to each other or more, every other block you'll start seeing a little orange light texture. It's not light, but it's a sort of glowing orange ball effect. And if you do meteorite stairs, like platform stairs, obviously you don't get the lights there, but it is unique that when you place more platforms horizontally, you get that really obvious texture change. So I wanted to be able to show that to some extent with the layout for the platforms themselves. And so that was my idea, besides laying them out with two little stairs on top and then two little flat sections on the bottom. Within the center is just a half platform, hammered once down to a half slab, basically. And then I was able to just fit in below the platforms the planter boxes, and that symmetrically allowed me to have the right amount of space for all of those. Do a little bit of tree touch up here in the center, and then in the top middle I needed something to sort of provide a centerpiece to the whole build. And I wanted something to represent and indicate the block display in a cool way. So all I really ended up with was this interesting sort of 3D emulated chalice, kind of. I don't know how to even describe it very well. You'll see, though, in a second, I ended up actuating some of these little diagonal floating bricks in hopes to provide visualize a 3D chalice top, kind of, that then above it magically suspended blocks themselves. I don't know. I just needed something visual to fill the space with, is all. And then I also kind of needed a little central control panel, so that I would have lighting control and block actuation control, because I did want a switch to actuate or deactuate all of the blocks, because it is important to be able to see how the shading changes when actuated or deactuated. So I did want to include that, along with a switch specifically for the diamond gem spark, so that you could turn the lights off. Well, I did that separately from the main lights of the platforms for the section, because that way you could turn the lights off and then see which blocks glowed and what color they produced. So that was a pretty important thing that I wanted as well. Then I remembered I wanted to, again, like the blocks, include item frames for the platform items themselves. So I got that added in. And then, as you can see here, I had pre-organized all the different block types and had them laid out ready to go, and then started messing around with what I wanted to do was like a 3D block design. So I was playing around with the idea of making something like that. First I just grabbed the ebonstone bricks and start playing around with shading and lighting and whatever, but I end up going with, I think, 3 smaller 3D block designs rather than that big one, and that way I was able to sort of theme each one with some of the classic bricks: gold, copper, and silver, if I remember correctly. Trying to come up with the best little design for block representation, and I ended up coming up with this, which isn't really anything special about it, but it's simple, and it sort of uniquely depicts the imagery of blocks and indicates that that's what I'm trying to display here. So that's kind of all there was to that, I guess. Came out pretty cool though. I liked this. This wasn't all that long that I built this after they re-included the ability to obtain the ancient brick varieties, and so I enjoyed getting the ancient copper, silver, and gold bricks out and putting them in place there. So additionally to the light controls though, in the main center here, another thing that I wanted to do was include the different monoliths, which obviously greatly alter the atmospheric colors and way things are visualized. They just change the lighting and the colors a lot, as you can see here. So I wanted to include all the different monoliths as toggleable via switches and stuff, so that you could have an idea of not only what the blocks looked like normally, but what would these blocks look like during the blood moon, and what do they look like during the blood moon when they're actuated. So I wanted to have all possible environments sort of available to the best degree that I could, to provide the most depth to the visualization that I could possibly get. So spent a while coming up with a design that was symmetrical and appealing visually, and that may be pretty much the last of the functionality that I really wanted to include into the block display. So at this point it was a matter of I still had to display the blocks themselves, and I still had to finish up furnishing and fleshing out the whole the framework platform. I didn't catch when I did it, but I did also already install the teleporter in the very center in the bottom of the tree, so that would then later become the access teleporter to the block display, which I kind of forgot about at first, but ended up having a nice pocket to include it there. So then obviously with the monoliths up in the top center, they won't reach all the way throughout the block display by themselves, so I end up adding in various other locations of the monoliths, although I didn't really care to have them visually displayed in other places. So what I did is I just echo coded them down on the lower levels, so that way with the switch you would activate the effect up here at the interface, but if you explored the rest of the section, then you would see the effect would remain, so you could see all the different blocks, but you wouldn't see the monoliths down there because I didn't feel like that would be necessary. I instead just added a handful of these statues there to sort of distract and hide the monoliths within. So then I do go back and I, with the very heavy reliance on the mahogany fences, am able to bolster up the reinforced platforms so there's no awkward gaps between them. And then looks like we are getting close to the actual block placement of the displays. The only final thing I kind of wanted to do, as I'm doing here, was to sort of frame the whole section itself. So I just got a bunch of this smooth granite out and outlined the display itself in this little perimeter line, which sort of contained all the blocks this way. So it actually provided an outside barrier that better encapsulated the display itself. I felt like it was a bit weird just having it all open to air, and it didn't feel very cohesive, I guess, in some ways. There was no good defining barrier to it, which you could definitely argue is still lacking to some degree, but now at least there's a little bit of a perimeter there. I made a quick little adjustment to my crafting area, specifically my what's it called? Ectomist crafting area with the demon altar. And then I went and crafted a bunch of marble furniture and just generally built some furniture fill sections so that the whole platform didn't look and feel very empty. Gave just a little bit of character and lighting to the platform as one would be walking around to admire the blocks. Tried to come up with a few ways to add little additional features, not only the furniture itself plainly, but I used pearlstone fences a fair amount, and then marble pillars and platforms to make little cubby sort of pop-ups and stuff, like the one that I put the bookcase in, which that little design ended up working out pretty nice. I really like basically using marble pillars or other pillars as well as the supports, and then putting a platform across the top as a little roof, and then hammering the outside into stairs so that it nicely blends down onto the pillar itself, the top of it, and then it provides a nice little section to include something in. So I used that specific design to lead into most all of the display sections. So eventually I do include that with the sign in it to indicate that you're approaching the block display, and then I can list out how many different blocks and what and then walls you're about to see, and the brief summary of each section, I suppose. Lights, of course, are important, so I try to get those sprinkled in as much as possible as well. Same little frame cubby with the pillars to go around the grandfather clocks, which makes them look a little more proud. And then here's the little intro section that I was talking about. At first I was messing around with like a standalone sign with just a bookcase next to it, but I think I end up expanding the bookcase or something like that. What do I do here? Yeah, I just kind of expand the little cubby here, and then manage to fit the sign somewhere in here, I believe. Make it a little taller. But no, overall the platform plus pillar combo I have really liked working with. There's a lot of cool options for it, from little like shelf designs to staircase layers to little cubbies like this. I end up using it quite a lot. And get some sand out here, and it looks like I'm finally now getting close to starting on the actual blocks. So I realized one thing I'm gonna have to think about was the sand and slush, I guess, falling silt, falling blocks, gravity affected blocks, because my block design did not account for that. So I found out that if you actuate sand blocks, they just fall through each other because they lose their collision. So it wasn't that big of a deal, but I realized that of all of the blocks, sand blocks were, and their various types, I would not be able to actuate, so I would just have to leave those off of the actuation list, which ended up not being that big of a deal. But finally, I end up, after figuring out how to roughly arrange and sort the block types, I start going at it, just placing them in, getting all of the walls and blocks placed simultaneously here. Most of the time I ended up placing the block with their wall variant next to them, so you can see both pretty close to each other, which worked out pretty good. As you can see, I do make adjustments here and there to make that work a little better in theory. So I try to make it visually intuitive and appealing to see the similar types of blocks and walls organized correctly. Alright, short break to go refill my water bottle there, but I'm back, and it looks like I still haven't finished placing all these blocks. Yeah, not really a whole lot to say, but again, organizing and trying to reorganize a little bit here and there as I go. Definitely always a good challenge to just the whole organization predicament with any sort of display. Getting prepared with the mosses and grasses. Got a bunch of the different like ecto walls, special stone variants. Here's my moss and grass section. Pretty, for the most part anyway. It's still interesting to me, and this seems like something that could definitely change. I believe that the corrupt hard mode stones, so like crimstone and ebonstone, whatever, or not necessarily hard mode, but the corrupt and crimson stones, they destroy moss when they spread to those blocks. And you can't put moss on crimstone or ebonstone, or pearlstone, I don't think, for that matter. Only regular stone and then stone brick, of course. So I did have all of those, both stone and stone brick included for the moss types. This is, they did, by this time they did add the jungle corrupt grass and jungle crimson grass. So that was, I was able to include that. I don't think is there no jungle hallowed grass either? Maybe there's not. That's kind of interesting. I don't remember thinking about that, but I probably did when I was trying to figure out, make sure I didn't miss any blocks. The one thing, or one of the things that I had to stay conscious about now was not putting the corrupt blocks near enough to corruptible blocks. So I had to be careful with, like, you know, the corrupt jungle grass. I couldn't put that right next to the jungle grass, otherwise I would end up with 2 corrupt jungle grasses before long. But I was able to sort of provide enough separation between the corrupt blocks that I made it work. And it wasn't too hard by any means, but definitely something I was lucky to realize and not accidentally end up with a bunch of corrupt stone, like breaking all my moss or whatever, which could have easily happened if I had accidentally gone too close. Got most of the gem spark in place here. Gem spark is kind of interesting that for the walls you have the regular walls, but also the offline walls that just aren't lit up, which makes sense, I guess, where basically to account for being able to toggle on and off the regular gem spark. Actually, that's another thing too. In order to actuate the gem spark blocks, I had to put actuators and then wiring on them. So actually, when I do toggle the actuation switch, the gem spark blocks also happen to turn off. So they that's kind of a weird thing that I couldn't overcome and provide every unique status of the gem spark because I couldn't power them separately from actuating them. We've got all the dungeon bricks, the dungeon walls, clouds, living, weird other living and or wand placed block types, fences. Here's the echo blocks and walls. Those are kind of fun, can't forget those. Getting there with the completion here. I think at this point I probably have all of the main easily distinguishable sections done, and there's just a bunch of miscellaneous stuff still left, like the poo, the shimmer, what is it called? Aether blocks or something like that. The unique walls purchased from the painter, all of the wallpapers, both seasonal and not. Different types of grass, again. The unique furniture themed set blocks and walls. I guess that's what's all in here. The cactus, slime, mushroom, flesh, bone, skyware, all of that stuff. And then I had the platforms ready to go and planter boxes. Kind of reorganized and figured out the best way to lay these out so that they would have progressive themes. luckily, block swap was a huge a huge help as far as placing all of this goes. There are only a few times when I don't use block swap. Actually, perhaps partially for the living trees that I made. I feel like there was some part of that process where I turned block swap off so that I could just add blocks here and there instead of replacing. But there are definitely times when I do turn it off. Looks like I had to add just a couple of extra display platforms for something. And then I had to go through and hammer all of the displays, being careful around the cobwebs. You cannot hammer cobwebs if you didn't know. And got these all hammered into place. You'll notice that when I hammer the grasses, I lose all of the grass features from the tops of the blocks, which isn't really ideal, but those themselves I later add into the plant display, I think. So I wasn't too worried about that. Yep, just a bunch of hammering. The Christmas tree blocks definitely have weird textures. All the woods. The newly added ash wood, which is still, really cool. And that just about has me finished up with the blocks here. So finally I'm able to start on the wiring. So I start attacking that. Hook up all of the regular lights. See how many of those I end up missing. Oh yeah. So that's another funny thing. I have cracked versions of all of the dungeon bricks, along with thin ice, which luckily now you can craft, so you can produce it. But if I accidentally fly into it or bump it and stuff, you can break it pretty easily. I mean, same with the cobwebs. So I had to replace that stuff a couple of times, I think. Then I was moving on to actuation. So on all of the blocks that I was able to and wanted to actuate, I got all those placed, which took another little bit of time and a lot of wire and actuators. Same with the platforms. Got to make sure that those are able to be actuated because they can be. So I wanted to add that option. Seems slightly random to have the slabs down there with the special ore bricks, but I guess that's where they fit. So, like I mentioned, I wanted the diamond gemspark lighting to be separate from the block actuation and also separate from the platform, the section lighting. So I kind of had to carefully design the wire path and dodge the actuators and the other lights and whatever else I had in the way. Then after the blue wire for the lights, I tried to find the path to sneak the connecting green wire for the actuation. Basically a lot of wires going this way and that way and trying not to cross them up where I didn't intend to. Definitely somewhat of a tricky task. I don't remember having any major issues though. Well, often when I do stuff like this, I find that I'm missing sections. I forgot to wire in certain sections, or I actuated stuff that I didn't want to, all that kind of stuff. But I don't remember having too many issues with this one. So then after that, it's the finalization of the furnishing with the books and the pots. Basically, just spamming pots all over everywhere is basically the cheat code to at least having a baseline of at least a mediocre build, no matter what you do. Here we go. So yep, I was able to add the little label in on top. And oh, that's right. I think so. I do have these two chests up here too. I forgot about that. But in these chests, I have paint brushes and paint supplies. So you can, if you do want to see what any paint looks like on any block, you can grab the paint out of the chest and try it out on any of the blocks. I set it up like that with the intention that I might use that to, you know, try different paints out. But I have never done that. When I do go to decide what blocks and paints to use on a build, I do use the block display, but I just look at the blocks themselves to remind myself of what options I have. I've not yet actually gone in and like tested out the what does the cyan paint look like on, you know, ancient silver bricks. So I kind of just do that in real time if I do need to try out different paints. But that does finally conclude the block display. So then, as I mentioned previously, I realized that the best way to start going about things would probably be to go ahead and mirror that whole structure on the right hand side. Interestingly, I had this one tall natural tree right there, two of them I guess, one of them taller than the other, that I wanted to keep in place, and luckily it so happened that my the curve of the eye shapes went just around these trees here, so I was able to leave them in place perfectly. So I'm still very happy with that allowance, that I was able to keep those trees in place. Again, as I've mentioned before, having now a blueprint to copy off of, I basically had all of the measurements, all the numbers and everything. I could just check the map and see where to lay out certain pieces. So I could just systematically go through, get all of the structure in place, all of the platforms done, and then go back and start doing the hammering and everything measured out and built, instead of having to figure it out as I go. Which I swear, it probably takes 2/3 at most of the time to reproduce something that that you had already built previously. And of course, as you add repetition to that, if I were to build this for like a third or fourth time, obviously with each time it gets quicker and quicker. So whenever you're able to not only copy a prototype exactly, but just have a theme to work with and copy, it makes such a huge difference in terms of time required to build something. I do still have this floating island here sitting with actually with my temporary NPC houses next to it. So I'm like, okay, well, gotta move these guys again. I think I moved them once more to another funny. I moved their same setup here, and I just put it further up in the sky. Yeah, right up here. And this one that I'm building here, this lasts throughout the whole rest of the build until I finally finish like the NPC housing, I think, which is pretty close to the end of the whole build. And then continuing with the copying. The only main difference that I already had in mind is that I wanted to do the tree differently. So instead of yellow and pink for the tree in the center, I ended up going with blue and white, which ended up being really cool contrast actually. The blue and white just looks pretty cool, kind of like frost and ice opposing each other. So that worked out pretty cool. But other than that, it's just copying over. Alright, just took another break and used the bathroom, and looks like I still haven't finished this dang project. What the heck? Just now getting started on the tree. Again, kind of the similar idea that I wanted to have two main separating trunks, each with different leaf color that they produced. So I had one side with white and one with blue. Although I don't remember if I had already decided on those colors yet or not. And then I wanted again to allow passing underneath, so needed to actuate the very bottom of it. And then start getting the main branches stretched out. Again, having the reference of the other tree helps a lot here. Not that I'm copying the same layout, but referencing it in terms of what I'd like to tweak or change as far as like maybe twig density or branch density or thickness and that type of stuff. Again, I was realizing that I wanted to try to include more leaves and just make it feel more full. So that's kind of what I already had in mind eventually to try to do. And maybe another thing that I'm noticing more and more is that I need to be less scared of overlapping tree or leaves over the trunks and the branches. Because that's another thing, when you look at a tree outside or whatever, it's not like you just see the main trunk and its shape perfectly formed in front of you. You see a lot of leaves overlapping and obscuring it in front. So it's something that I tried to do and include with leaf clumps and sections overlapping and obscuring the main trunks and branches, but something that again I just don't do enough, I feel like. And it makes it feel less full and less, it doesn't allow for as much depth, I guess, is what I think. I think I go for the same or a very similar block array though, or palette, with the base of living leaves and living mahogany leaves, and then adding in that other stuff that I did on the other side too, which I can't remember exactly, but included those coral blocks. I want to say there's like crispy honey. I don't know if there's clouds or not. Unfortunately, oh yeah, here's the crispy honey. When you break living leaves and living mahogany, you don't get the wood returned. So I did end up, going through a lot of wood to create these, but it's not like wood is very hard to get, so it wasn't by any means a problem. It did prompt me, however, to make just a big stretch of trees that grew way up at the top of this world. I just made a big runway of dirt or grass that grew trees, and you might be able to see it here and there at certain points when I open the map up. But I was able to just basically chop and replant those trees every once in a while, and had more than enough wood than I ever needed, so I never ended up having any issues as far as that goes. But I do, actually, you'll definitely see when I take those trees out in the end, which I think maybe all, or at least most of, get cleaned up later in this video. Because after we finish the tool and the weapon display here, I do put together the Dark Star Void Vault, which is my mass storage for specifically non-stackable items, which I build right up against the top of the world in the center, where I did have the tree farm briefly. Anyway, still going on filling the tree out. Even though I had the other tree already as a sort of a reference to go off of, it still takes a lot of time, and there's a long process because there are so many different blocks, so many different layers of textures, and then the hammering and the actuation, and then finally getting the walls to blend different sections behind and in front of other things. Oh, had to sneeze. Everything just, there's so many steps, it takes a lot. Getting on to the actuation part finally. So I basically have the hammered sections, or have everything as hammered as I want them to be. So start with that. It is important to do your hammering before actuation, because if not, I find in almost every case you'll end up not being able to hammer things as efficiently if they're actuated. Because when you're hammering a block, if all the blocks surrounding it are actuated, the game sees it as no adjacent blocks being in place. So you have to hammer it many more times if you want it to blend with the blocks next to it. Or equal to, or more times, I should say. So it's almost never good to do your actuation before hammering if you can avoid it at all costs, basically. But after the actuation, I got the tree basically where I wanted it to be. So then I went and continued with the platform filling. Took a little break there because I realized I didn't include a teleporter down in the mount and pet section. So I got that squeezed in there in the gazebo. I think I put the teleporter here in the mount, or not mount, in the weapon display too. And then I start by getting my granite out and measure up the for my granite frame around the whole section, and this would then allow me to have a good visualization of the space that I had, and then I could start arranging and organizing the tools and the weapons in ways to find the best way that would work. And amazingly, my measurements, I think, came out just about on point, and I didn't have to go like rebuild this whole thing at all. It's miraculously ended up being in the correct place. changed some wiring to get that out of the way. That red line was just a line for my NPC housing access. That's just a temporary thing that I took out by the end of it. And I looked on the map and realized I still need more leaves, man. It just doesn't feel full enough. So I add some more leaves. I do a little bit of overlap over some of the main branch or trunk areas and just fill in here and there to make it a little more full. Really just taking up about all the space that I had and just putting little bits of leaves more and more here and there because it was just too empty, I guess. After that, though, I do start prototyping the display for each of the individual tools and weapons. So most everything in this whole section would be able to be placed and displayed on the weapon rack, which is 3x3, placed and hangs on walls. So I started coming up with what I needed to do to make that look cool. It's a similar size, being 3 wide, to the platforms that I had the blocks displayed on. So I figured it was going to be somewhat similar, and I just needed to come up with some sort of adequate looking holder for each of the weapon racks. And I finally ended up going pretty simply, if I remember right, with just the like the starry walls and then echo walls, so that it's just this clean, smooth looking pole that hang the small pole that the items rest from. And I messed around a lot with different colors and stuff, but by the end of it, just the regular starry walls seemed the best because they don't have a lot of color, and that way each item would be able to stand out most fully. With the exception of like black items, I guess, with black sprites, because they kind of blend in and lose some of their features, but overall I found that it would be the best overall option for items for tools and weapons across the board. So that's what I ended up going with, and it turned out to be actually a very simple design. I did, of course, have a bunch of tools and usable items that don't go on weapon racks that I wanted to display. I guess maybe not tools, but equipment mainly. So you have your grappling hooks. I believe all the wands. You can't place the block placing wands in weapon racks. I could be wrong about that, though. I'm not totally sure. But stuff like brushes and equipment items, grappling hooks, different tool use items like the cell phone and all of its crafting items leading up to it, buckets, sponges, basically all that type of stuff I wanted to include here because they are tools categorically in my mind, functionally. So I wanted to have sections for those as well. So that's what I started going with here with the large arrays of item frames rather than weapon racks. And by this point, I basically had listed out and tested what items would go where. And I did find some interesting things. And I think I don't know if I include these in other places, but interesting things like coins being able to be placed on weapon racks. I still don't know exactly why you can do that. Technically, coins are all ammo items due to the coin gun, and they can be placed in the ammo slot. Actually, can they? No, maybe they can't. Maybe only the money slots in the inventory. Okay, so one interesting exception I note was the rods of discord and harmony. Those can actually be placed in weapon racks, so I put those in weapon racks. And by the end of my whole organization and reorganization, I ended up with 164 item frames and 554 weapon racks throughout the whole display. Oh, here's my sort of explanation of organization right here, actually. I forgot that I had a nice little visual included in the video, so that's actually nice. Good job, me. I was just going over again my notes that I have, and basically they say what I just showed on the signs there. Generally how I ended up coming up with the organization, and then I just had to figure out how to get all that to fit in the space I had. Actually, I was wrong about that item frame and weapon rack count. By the end, I did end up shifting like 3 items from item frames to weapon racks, which I probably include those rods, and maybe the other thing would be the gravedigger's shovel. I end up being able to put in the weapon rack, which makes sense, instead of the tool like item frame section. So in the end, it's 161 item frames and 557 weapon racks total, which that should be what it says on like the initial summary sign when you come up to this display in world. There it is. I'm still trying to get a good idea of what my timeline was for this. I end up finishing this display with about 990 hours on my character total. Which, what was I at when I finished the block display, actually? 961 hours on the block when I finished the block display. So it took me about 29, probably a little shy of 30 hours to do this section here. And after I had finished previously, I was at 924. So it was probably like roughly 37 hours for the block display, and then maybe 29 for this one. But that would include like off-camera item collection and organization. So it may have taken me a little while longer to collect all of the weapons, the niche ones that I didn't have a lot of on hand. Actually, I remember probably the hardest item that I tried to collect for this, which I think I have noted somewhere in this log, was the bat hook. So I wanted to fit all grappling hooks in here, which almost all of which I had easily on hand. But for whatever reason, I did not have a bat hook. And I think I opened like a couple hundred goodie bags, which I didn't have a ton of extra on in stock. And so I ended up dipping into my like storage supply from old worlds. Still couldn't get a bat hook, so I stole it off of one of my old characters where I had been using it as my primary hook. Finally, to include it here in Tigaria. So overall, it did probably take me longer to come up with all the items for this display than it did the blocks for the block display. Even though I had a much less extravagant display for each of the weapons here, like I just have the weapon rack with 3, starry, I think gold starry walls, and then the diamond gem spark blocks underneath. Each one still required to be hammered on each edge. And hammered to be sloped up, so it took like whatever it is, that is 4 clicks probably per hammer, which just hammering itself was quite tedious, and it takes a little while to get through the whole process. And kind of like I mentioned earlier, I remember finding for a while as time went on different little corners that I had missed or incorrectly hammered, and it just all blends together, and it's hard to notice until eventually I do. I want to get all of these actuated because for these I didn't need any collision or anything. I just wanted to be able to provide that lighting, but I did want to make sure I had everything hammered before doing the actuation, like I mentioned. And then I do that. And I must do some counting and organizing here pretty soon. Or I guess painting first here, just to lighten up the gem spark blocks a little bit. Now that they're actuated, they're pretty dark, so wanted to bring them out a little bit more again. And then I go ahead and add the rest of the echo blocks. Sorry, echo walls. Another interesting thing that I discovered while doing this whole section is that the size modifying modifiers on weapons, so say you have a regular breaker blade versus a large one versus a tiny one, the size difference does show up when you place it into weapon racks. So when I did this display, I wanted to make sure that all the items did not have any of the size changing modifiers on them. And if they did, then I just went and reforged them until they didn't. But that was something interesting that I did not realize prior to doing this. Now a real weapon display would have one of every size of every weapon displayed. That would be what I should have done. Or at least, honestly, it would be cool to just have a little, like a little array of all the variously sized breaker blades, for example, because that's a good one to visualize the size on. Have like a tiny breaker blade, wait, what is it? Tiny, small, maybe small, regular size. Then you have the shameful one, and then the massive one and large ones that are bigger. There are probably 4 or 5 different sizes at least. Here we go with the actual weapon racks. Again, like on the block display, I included the little iron fences on the bottom to add just that little bit of detail. Then get the weapon racks in place, and I must pretty soon start figuring out... Oh, I guess I do the center first here. So similarly to on the left, where I wanted just a centerpiece displayed as something cool and something to represent the section that it's in, I wanted similarly something cool and something visually representative of the section over here. And so my idea, which I ended up really liking, was to do custom designs of each weapon type. And display them in this cool little, as like a custom statue form, I guess. So the first one I started with was ranged, so I made a little custom bow design. And then, oh, that's right, I was theming each one based on the celestial fragment color. So then I think this is for the magic weapon. I tried to design something out of the nebula color theme. Tried to make just some powerful looking staff, maybe. Changed it to living wood to see if that would work. I think I messed around with a bunch of stuff and before I found something that actually looked decent. The bow was easy to do. I got that right off, but then the magic weapon I had a lot of trouble with. I think I ended up scrapping the staff idea and going with some sort of like magic spell looking thing instead. or maybe some sort of magical artifact type weapon. I don't know, but it turned out a little cooler than the staff was going, so I ended up keeping that. What I don't remember though is if I think I may swap around where these are located, because I ended up organizing the display a lot differently from this. Although maybe I just keep it like that. So then this one was the summon weapon. I wanted to attempt to create some sort of summon weapon. And so this one kind of had to be a staff in some ways. So I started messing around with how to make a cool looking staff design, and it's pretty tough. I guess partially I wasn't helped by the fact that I was trying to go diagonally with the staff part, and it was just pretty tricky. So I end up being able to transition to sort of a curved, like a scythe shape with a curved head on the staff, kind of like the tiki staff, I guess, if I were to imagine that big crook on top, or the witch doctor's staff, how it's got a big unique head feature on it. And so I kind of shifted over to a design kind of like that. And I did raise it up by like one block above the other weapons so that I would fit kind of the curvature theme of the arrangement, I guess. But I ended up coming up with that blue. I guess it reminds me in some ways of a seahorse staff, but it looks kind of cool and unique, I guess. It's not really that cool. And then finally, the fourth weapon would be a sword, of course, to represent the melee. And I went with the solar theme, obviously, so I grabbed some meteorite brick to try to work with, and went from there. Ended up pretty quickly coming up with this curved scimitar looking design, and then not really a whole lot to say about it, I guess. I tried to play around with some different flares and like back effects off of it, but ended up with a pretty simple design. But it ended up, I do like it in the end. Made a few modifications to my bow. Maybe I just lowered it by a block or something like that. And maybe I lower the magic one too, or maybe I was lowering the bow to match. No, the magic one needs to come down. Yeah. Anyway, the idea is just to provide a cool visualization to represent the theme of the display, and definitely had some fun coming up with these designs. And I do think that each one ended up being unique and cool, and I think recognizable as far as theme and damage type representation. Oh, maybe that's why I organized them in this way, because this is the order in which I display the statues down in the center of the core below the spawn point. That's why I laid them out in this order, because I didn't yet realize how I wanted to organize the actual weapons. And I end up doing them differently than this because of just how the numbers work out. But that would be why I do it in this order here initially. Then just some unique looking statue structure to go along as the upper interface, similarly to there in the center of the block display. Although in this case, there was not nearly as many activatable features that I wanted to include. I didn't see any reason to include the monolith effects, although I may still include monoliths or some of them just to fit with the theme of the item representation I put. I don't remember for sure, but I didn't have blocks to actuate to provide that variation. Basically, it was just lighting alone that I needed to do, which was only two different circuits. One for the GemSpark display lights themselves, and one for the platform lights, all of the marble lighting that I'm putting down now with the rest of the furniture. So as far as that goes, it's definitely a lot simpler. And just similarly to on the other side, I sort of borrow some ideas, some little thematic sections, and just fill it in with different types of furniture. The different tools and weapon type statues obviously are very fitting for this. So I definitely had to take advantage of that. One of the things I find works good for general furnishing in this sort of theme is just the regular armor statues, which are pretty nice because you don't have to, you can craft them. They're very easy to get. It only costs stone, of course, so you can basically get mass amounts of them for free, and they look pretty cool. So definitely something easy to implement. And then angel statues, sort of similarly, can work pretty well in a lot of scenarios, but they aren't craftable. So you do have to find them naturally. But because not only are they found naturally, you can find them from chests, and depending on if you make use of special world seeds, you can actually get quite a lot of angel statues pretty easily. So I have, even though I haven't really gone on specific angel statue collection sprees, I still have more than enough in stock to do whatever I want to do with. I have these little floating lantern designs to help light up awkward sections where there's only stairs. I can't place the lamps on the ground, or I just need to fill a little space in here and there. Then get going with the wiring. So I actually do the wiring ahead of time in this one before I get the items all displayed. I tried to be somewhat strategic with the color of wiring used. So in general, I think you'll probably have noticed that I've tried to do all of the interior lighting with green, and even some of the other circuits with green as well that don't have to overlap, or with minimal overlaps, and just echo painted, what are they called, junction boxes or whatever. And that way it allowed me to reserve wire colors for the teleporter connections later on. So that was definitely something that I have been keeping in mind since early on in the construction process. Got the food finally touched up on the little tables and dishes, and then finally I'm able to start with the actual display item placement. So I have everything pretty organized ahead of time, and I just go through and start grabbing them out of the chests and getting them in place. So here are all of the miscellaneous tool-like or equipment-like items that I wanted to include. Then I have all the ammo that I wanted to do as well. These things both go into item frames rather than weapon racks. So get all of that laid out here as best I can. And then move on to tools, starting with the pickaxes. A nice intuitive category to represent. Just go ahead and fit the drills and pickaxes all kind of together. Realized that I missed one or needed to reorganize it slightly, so when oh no, maybe that's what happened. Some of these, actually most all of those pickaxes obviously are crafted, so I wanted to either remove the modifiers or at the very least remove any modifiers that changed the size of them, like I mentioned earlier. So that's probably what I was doing there. Some paint touch-up and axe placements. I had a little bit of an awkward space down here, so I ended up putting the axes and the explosives, which interestingly you can put bombs and explosives on weapon racks. And then above that, I didn't really have any more tools, but I did have the summon weapons, which ended up being just a handy number to fit in right there. So that took care of both of the eye sections, and then finish up on the outer portions, the main outside portions, with magic weapons, followed by ranged weapons here on the right hand side. And I did have enough space, I was able to kind of skip a few frames here and there, or racks, weapon racks, and that way it would allow for a little bit of separation visually between magic weapons and ranged weapons. Now I didn't have enough space to completely isolate, say, like all of the thrown type weapons or consumables, and then the bows here, and then the guns here, and then the launchers here. I organized them roughly in those categories, but within the ranged section I wasn't able to sort of provide each one with a unique space that's separated. But it still worked out okay, I think. And finally, the melee weapons. So all of the melee takes up the entire left-hand side. And again, organized based on weapon type, categorized with the maces, the spears, the boomerangs, the yo-yos, the swords, and all of that. And finally, just take away the extras, and that basically fills in the whole weapon display. Tools and weapon, I guess. And here's kind of my final count as to what is actually included in here. And there we have it. Oh, so then the final thing that I want to include, oh, and here's the tree removal that I was talking about, is the construction of the Dark Star Void Vault. So partially prompted by having to collect all the different tools and weapons, which are all non-stackable items, my storage room has started having capacity questions. Can you imagine that? My 1,400 chest storage room was filling up in certain areas. This is because some items don't stack, namely weapons, tools, armors, accessories are a big one, and a lot of vanity items. So many of these things are randomly dropped items, and while I'm doing other projects that require me to grind for a while in certain sections, I end up accumulating a lot of these items. The worst by far, though, is I'm sure many of you have farmed like the Frost Moon and or Pumpkin Moon in the end of the game, and by the end of it find that no matter how clean your inventory was at the start, it requires multiple full trips of full inventory plus Void Vault to pick up all of the weapons and junk that is dropped from all of the bosses that are slain. Basically, I could easily throw a lot of this stuff out, but some of it I do kind of want to have as, just in case I want to do something with it. So I ended up with the idea to create this Darkstar Void Vault, just basically an absurd amount of overflow storage. And I could just do it way up in the sky, where I would have easy teleporter access from my storage room here. And I would just put a bunch of chests, and each chest would only hold one specific non-stackable item. So, for example, blindfolds and vitamins and armor polish, all of those types of accessories. Mummy costumes, so you have like the mummy masks, shirts, and pants that are dropped randomly from all types of mummies, and a whole bunch of other items similarly obtained, I guess. Basically, all of them are drops, enemy drops, which is why they're randomly accumulated as time goes on. Shackles, that's a big one. Partially, I just want to see how many shackles I can collect. But nonetheless, these items were filling up my storage room completely, so I needed some kind of solution. So that's why I went about designing the Darkstar Void Vault, which, as mentioned, simply holds a mass array of chests, each holding only one specific item, non-stackable. And that's basically all there is to it. I built this large, wide design because I didn't want it to take up a lot of space down in the sky portion of my world in case I wanted to include various builds there. I didn't want to be encroaching on my build space. So my idea was to build it very large horizontally, partially because horizontal movement is very easy and fast, whereas vertical can be tricky, especially with like platforms holding chests up and stuff. So that was basically the reasoning behind the shape. And I went ahead and provided it with some unique building visuals with a pattern of walls and columns that ended up looking kind of cool in the end. So I was definitely happy with the design. But I will give an example of one idea that I've had for a long time, and I don't know if I'll ever actually do this or not, but I have like chests full of mummy costumes. And I have always thought like maybe someday I could just build an army of mummies in a desert and have that be like included in some sort of cool desert like mummy army build or something. I don't know. Or maybe I could use them in the construction of like of some sort of adventure map at some point, which is kind of the next thing I'm actually considering starting as a big project, would be a big adventure map. But anyway, yeah, having a bunch of mummy costumes or a couple hundred shackles or whatever it is definitely not something that I'm likely gonna need, but if I do need it, I'll have it, I guess. It might also be a problem that I have with collecting and hoarding and not throwing anything out. Even in game like this, it's kind of funny because I see a lot of people AFK who seem to have issues like this. But luckily for me, I seem to keep my collecting and hoarding habits confined to a digital space, which is much more efficient for myself and the space around me. Anyway, yeah, that's basically the Dark Star Void Vault. And the name of it, I just called that based on the skin line that Riot came out with for League of Legends characters. Not really that much to say about it. It's up in the sky, it's dark themed, and it's kind of void themed because it's purple. So it already fit the Void Vault theme in Terraria, but I just modified it with a Dark Star sort of name because of the League of Legends reference, just for fun. Let me look, though. I do have my notes on this project. Yeah, my storage room was already having overflow issues, so I came up with this idea to provide overflow, basically. Started clearing out extra items of basically all weapon types, and actually during the creation of this was when I passed 1,000 hours on this here character in game. But when I finished the vault, where is my count here? Oh, here it is. So it actually holds, according to my notes, 1,696 chests in this void vault up here. So that so far is lasting me. I will say, if based on my brief memory, I've probably filled up a third at least, or somewhere in that general amount of space of the vault right now. One fun thing that I did was I just used these pink dungeon chests because they're craftable out of pink dungeon bricks, and which are super easy to get. And I painted them all with echo coating so that they're invisible by default. But then I include item frames to visualize which items are where. So if I do ever need to go find myself a bunch of enchanted swords or whatever, I'll be able to find it pretty easily by just looking for that sprite in the blank expanse that is the vault here. So yeah, that pretty much will wrap up where we are for this at this point in Tigaria. Just a little bit of finishing up while I place all the chests and item frames, but then that's pretty much it. Next time is when we'll move on towards the boss display, and the rest of the display is sort of central and top in above the core of Tigaria, which were a lot of fun. Basically, most every section was pretty fun, but as far as they go, I suppose that the block display along with the tool and weapon display were some of the more grindy and less interesting, I guess, overall. But yeah, next time we'll get into the boss displays. They're cool, the cool little relic and trophy display sections that I have for each boss. So for that, for now, I'll leave you with this. I really appreciate anyone who's tuned in and checked out the video. Hopefully it was enjoyable and interesting in some way here or there. Thanks again for checking it out, and hope you have an outstanding rest of your day.